Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. It's time to talk about last night. It was horrific. It was appalling. It was embarrassing. For Tottenham Hotspur, it was humiliating. Uh, Amazing to think that just a few months back, Spurs were in the Champions League final, and then they produce a second half display like that. The reason I waited until a little bit later today to do this was purely because I was just waiting for word from the club that when Pochettino's next press conference was, which is going to be Friday morning. The reason for that is it was just, one of those little things is despite the fact that Poch was incredibly calm after the match last night and the way he kind of reasoned and spoke about stuff, and the fact that he called for everyone to man up essentially and fix this problem, you just never know, in terms of that kind of Latin temperament, that emotion, what might have taken place today after a ridiculous result like that. You just never know. So I just wanted to kind of wait, because the whole point of the press conference is they have to be confirmed by Pochettino, and he has to then state when's the best time. So the fact that he's done that shows that it's business as normal at the club, and nothing drastic has happened today. But let's talk about the match. I must say, I kind of agree with Pochettino on one point. While the second half, especially that last 10 minutes, was absolutely horrific in terms of football, defending, everything you can name it from a Spurs perspective, I would say I almost kind of had a completely opposite feeling about the first half. I'd probably say for me, probably maybe the first 40 minutes or so, I thought that was actually Spurs' best 40 minutes of the season. Probably even better than Crystal Palace match, purely because of the opposition. If Son Heung-min and Tanguy Ndombele, that was an awful pronunciation, Tanguy Ndombele had put away the many chances that Spurs created, the game would have been buried by half-time. Absolutely out of sight for Bayern. Son, amazing player, lovely guy, has come up with so many important goals for Spurs over the years. But just sometimes he has these kind of nights in Europe, particularly, I'd say, maybe more so than the Premier League, where it's almost like that kind of clinical side of him just isn't quite there at times. It's really weird. And don't get me wrong, we know this is a guy that scored magnificent goals in Europe, ones against City, both legs last season. But just there's some matches where he's got chances where maybe you think he's going to put them away and he doesn't. Like last night, could have had a hat-trick easily, and that would have been that. But obviously, I'm not going to lay the blame for last night at Son's door, because there were so many other players that were far worse. So that'd be incredibly harsh. So I'm not. But what I would say is that, I was a bit worried with Eriksen and Lamela not starting, that Spurs might not have a playmaker. I thought Ndombele, probably his best 40 minutes in a Spurs shirt. He was sensational. He showed every single aspect of what Spurs broke their club record for. He was threading passes. The pass for Son's first chance was one of the best passes I've seen from a Spurs player in years. Honestly, the way he bent the pass right into Son's path was magnificent. It really should have been a goal. He was superb. But then just the way that last night worked, arguably probably Spurs' best player up to that point, was then perhaps responsible for what happened, with the two goals. I mean, the first one, Kimmich, little body swerve, completely threw off on Dembele, went the wrong way. That gave the Bayern Munich player space to unleash that great shot past Lloris. And I think coming straight after Son's goal, it was a bit of a kind of hammer blow, wasn't it? And then it was even more of a hammer blow just before half-time, with, again, on Dembele maybe having a chance to clear the ball. He didn't, and the ball hit the player on the floor, went to Lewandowski, and bang, a clinical finish. And this, I think, is a really frustrating thing for me as well, is that Spurs are now developing this really crap habit of conceding just before half-time. And we know it's cliched, but it's so true how psychologically damaging a goal just before half-time is. It completely changes your mentality. And, Spurs in a half where, to be honest, for quite quite a lot of the first half played Bayern off the pitch in that first half. Bayern had their breaks, don't get me wrong, but I think for a lot of that game, Spurs absolutely took it to Bayern. But then suddenly, 2 goals, Bayern going to half-time ahead, and it's just not good enough, They did it against Arsenal, did it against Olympiacos. It's just putting yourself on the back foot, and we know Spurs have got spirit, other than the last 20 minutes or so last night. But we know they can fight back, but they shouldn't have to keep fighting back. That's the main issue, isn't it? It's like there's only so many times you can keep shooting yourself in the foot and keep walking, really. It's that's a weird metaphor. I don't know where that one came from, so I apologise for that. But yeah, it was such a strange turn of events. How Spurs, Pochettino, I think he said afterwards, it was the best period of a match where he's managed the team this season. And I agree, I do. I think because of the quality of opposition, they're just more clinical. That game's done. Second half, second half was just another place entirely. It was they just fell behind. The defending was awful. Let's start with someone I always get moaned at because I praise him so much. So, in the interest of to show it, I try and be as objective as I can about the players. Harry Winks last night wasn't good enough for him. He's a guy who's had some great Champions League nights. Real Madrid, Dortmund. I remember him absolutely starring against him. He's had great nights in this competition. Last night, he just gave the ball away too much. There were times when he'd have the ball, he'd be moving away, and then he'd turn. He's kind of developed this Dembele turn, which often works. Last night, he was turning back into trouble. Don't get me wrong, he was getting some hospital passes, which were putting him into problems as well. But there was just too many times when he just turned straight into a kind of a cluster of Bayern players, and it put Bayern on the counter. Spurs were suddenly at a disadvantage, absolutely trying to run back and work out what the hell had happened. And I'm trying to remember which goal it was. It was one of either the 4th or 5th goal came from Winks losing the ball. And we have to talk about Serge Aurier. Feels like he's a common subject at the moment. I said in my last video about how Pochettino had said about Aurier after that great performance against Palace, now we need to see consistency from him. And unfortunately, last 2 games, we've seen consistency, just not of anything good. Red card a couple of days ago. And yesterday, he was just all over the place. There was no focus. There was no concentration. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure with Spurs taking risks, he and Rose had to be further up the pitch. But it was one bizarre moment where I was watching the match and Eric Lamela had come on. So it would have been the last 10 minutes or so. And Aurier had gone up for an attack. It had crumbled. It hadn't worked. Rather than coming back and getting back into a fullback role, he stayed upfield, came inside and played as like a number 10 behind Kane and I think it was Lucas at that point. And you just think, what are you doing there? You're not creative. You're not a playmaker. You can't, you're not going to win headers on at that point. What are you doing there? And he kind of was just milling around in that number 10 area doing nothing. And Lamela, who'd actually gone back, a player who can play the number 10 role, was back at right back and was shouting at him as if, so what are you doing? Get back here so I can get up and try and do something. Eventually, Aurier kind of came across the pitch. And ironically, literally 30, 45 seconds after that, Gnabry got down that side. Aurier was a mile away from him and couldn't even keep up. And they went through and scored. I think that was probably the 5th or 6th goal. And we'd seen that already. He'd done that to Gnabry before. He'd done this awful lunging late tackle where I think he thought, I can still win this. He was atrocious last night, Aurier. Again, if I'm going to give him anything, it's first half, he wasn't too bad. He set up on Dembele for a really good chance, but just defensive-wise, it's just about concentration, and it just doesn't seem to be there. And I think this is why we're talking about a player who's never really hit the top level of right-backs in the game. It was just he was torn apart. They just targeted that side. But I'm not going to let other fullbacks off either. Danny Rose, similar stuff, out of position. His passing was sloppy. Especially late in the game, he was chasing back and failing to keep up as well. But I just felt, for me, Aurier, especially after coming out in the summer and saying he had no competition, and this role, the right back role was his, to nobody else was competition for him. It's like self-awareness. Have that awareness of your game and your limitations and what you need to work on. And it was just, I'd be stunned if he plays against Brighton on Saturday. I really would. I wonder whether we'll see Foyth there. We may even see the Davinson Sanchez experiment once again, or maybe even Eric Dyer. He just needs to maybe sit out again and just kind of look at it and just say, you're not first choice right back. And that's the reason why it just really, really wasn't good at all. But I just think, as a team, the collapse in that last 10 minutes was so disappointing. It harked back to the AVB days, the Tim Sherwood days. You remember when Spurs used to go up against, I don't know, Liverpool's, Man City's, teams like that, and absolutely be torn apart, and we'd end up with 5-0, 6-0 scorelines. And this kind of felt like that. It was like, Pochettino teams don't do that. They will kind of fight, they will battle until the last minute, just in case there's a way back into the game. And it was almost like they got the penalty, Kane scored it, and they just really didn't battle at all. They almost just gave. I think Lloris has since come out and admitted they just kind of gave up in that last 10 minutes, and it's just embarrassing. Embarrassing for the club. It's embarrassing for the players. Pochettino is a man who makes a big song and dance on Champions League nights. He knows that all of Europe and the world and people back home in Argentina are watching him. I think I've said this before, but you notice he dresses all smart. He wears his black shirt, his Spurs suit, his kind of raincoat, rather than the coaching training stuff he normally wears for Premier League matches. He is very aware that he is on a big stage. And for everyone to have seen a 7-2 result, which I think is the worst home defeat in a major competition for Tottenham Hotspur, certainly the worst result I can think of in the Pochettino era, this will have hurt him deeply. After the game, he was very, very measured, as I say in the press conference. He was saying, I think the expression he used was, the emotion is on the skin right now, and now is not the time to shout, judge or analyse. He said, we will look at it tomorrow, obviously today now, and then we need to have one idea about it and one way forward. And he harked on again about the new chapter after Champions League and how he told everyone it was going to be difficult and things like that. And I get that, totally. I still feel, anyone that's read my stuff will know that I feel Spurs, Pochettino in particular, he hasn't got the rebuild he wanted this summer. And the part of it he did get, the 3 players, he's been incredibly unlucky with injuries. You do wonder how different the energy would be in this team if you had Lo Celso playing in it. Because Christian Eriksen clearly is now not the first choice playmaker. With everything that's happened around him, and his desire to leave in the summer, Pochettino has clearly decided, and his form, because his form has been rubbish. Let's not gloss over it. You had Lo Celso playing in there, a player that Pochettino really wanted to bring in. You've got Sessegnon potentially playing at left back, or maybe just providing pace up front. And you've got Dembele, who in the last couple of games we've started to see real glimpses of what he's going to bring to Tottenham. That's 3 players, that's a big chunk of the first 11 suddenly being re-energised and refreshed. And Pochettino hasn't really been able to call upon that. So I do feel sorry for him in that respect. And you do wonder how much change January is going to bring, and whether there is more reshaping of what this Tottenham team for the new chapter should look like. But all of that aside, putting it over in one corner, last night was just not good enough, that second half. It just wasn't. It doesn't matter what's going on behind the scenes in terms of unsettled players, anything like this, which Pochettino says that time has gone. That last, half an hour or so of the match, it just was rubbish. It just wasn't good enough. But the players know that. Me ranting off at a camera about it, they will be well aware of it. Today will be just a recovery day. They won't train hard, obviously. Tomorrow they will properly take a look at everything. Maybe even today, maybe they'll have done some video analysis, things like that today. But they will know that they've got to go to Brighton on Saturday. Lunchtime kickoff. I'd imagine there'll be a lot of changes. I'd be stunned. I was actually quite surprised that other than Ali and Aurier, obviously because he got sent off, that was pretty much the team that battled away, didn't it? With 10 men against Southampton for an hour. So they were going to tire. That's another thing I suppose we could throw in the mix, that they were going to tire towards the end of the game, and maybe that played a part. But Saturday they have to freshen up. They have to have fresh ideas, fresh impetus. Because that's one benefit of having a game so quickly afterwards. They can at least try and get some of that out of their system. But that's one that's going to hurt. It really is. It's going to hurt the fans, paying their money to go out in the pouring rain to watch that. And it's going to hurt the players. A lot of them who, they've got to look at themselves as well. Pochettino he will get a lot of flack, as he would. Levy will get a lot of flack for what maybe did or didn't happen in the summer. But ultimately, those players went out there, they were good enough in the first half, something happened in their mentality, switched in the second half, and it just wasn't good enough whatsoever. So, yeah, we need changes. The team needs changes. It needs freshening up. Pochettino now, maybe this is a bit like the Aston Villa match in his first season, where during that game they were losing, his job was on the line, and he just kind of then suddenly knew, I've got to change this. I've got to change up the team. I've got to now create a team that are all pulling forward. Perhaps that second half will be the trigger to switch on, because if they let that one bug them and go with them and leave a scar, then this is going to be one hell of a tough season. Pochettino said it would be anyway, but they need to find their way forward. I'm just trying to think. I don't think injury-wise whether we'll see anyone back. Lo Celso's still end of October this month. Sessegnon, hopefully we'll get a bit of an update on Friday at the press conference, but I wouldn't imagine he'll be anywhere near contention for the next game or two. But Spurs need to sort it out. Just one little other thing I want to say, which is completely non-match related. I've had so many people asking me about this rubbish about Christian Eriksen, Jan Vertonghen, this stupid rumour, which I think I've been told by a few people, they saw the original Facebook post, someone did as a joke on social media on Facebook to say, look, if I make up a story, let's see how far this can spread and see whether we can even get it in the media. And unfortunately, people cut and paste, people send, and it's got to the ridiculous situation where today, Eriksen and Vertonghen actually have to come out and say that it's utter crap, which they really shouldn't, because I just think we should, as people, just have that little bit of filter and kind of look at something and think, is that likely? Is that genuine? Do we, is that something we want to believe, or should believe? And I think that's part of the issue. I think sometimes, something that isn't true can actually get to a bigger audience than the actual truth. And it was just uncomfortable kind of watching it all this week in that. And then obviously then after last night's match, everyone says, oh, it's because of this. And by the way, I'm not even stating what it was because it was so stupid. And I just think we as people, and it's me included, obviously there's been times where I've said to people, oh, God, have you seen this? Have you heard that? Obviously not reported on it, but, and I think sometimes we just need to be a little bit more discerning in what we choose to believe and where it's come from. And yes, I know that can be ironic coming from a journalist sometimes. But yeah, back to Tottenham. There will be a bit of an inquest this week. Of course they will. Certain players we will see don't play on Saturday. That will be put down to tiredness or freshening the team. I think the key will probably be after the international break, who plays against Watford, who starts that first match, and that will give you a good indication over whether certain players, Pochettino, have just decided, well, enough's enough. We're now foraging forward with this new look team. And I'd be stunned if Lo Celso and Sessegnon, like I say, don't start to become a real part of that first team going forward once they return. So yeah, so that was a match. Apologise for having me whinge and moan for the last 20 minutes or so, but it was just one of those nights, wasn't it? An absolute night and day of match. First half, superb in many aspects. Second half, absolutely an abomination of a football match. And hopefully it's just a freak result, and Spurs will get back to kind of winning ways at Brighton, because if they don't, things are going to get slightly uncomfortable. So let's hope they get their mindset and their mentality on the games ahead. And I shall catch you some point later where we should discuss all things Tottenham Hotspur.